She believed she was to wed a disabled millionaire. But what happened at the altar left her breathless? Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let us return to our main character. The rain was falling in a steady sheet across the streets of Austin, Texas, turning the sidewalks into mirrors of slick gray. On that chilly evening, Sophia Carter clutched her worn leather bag tighter to her chest, every step echoing with the weight of her problems. She was 26 years old, working 2 jobs, and still drowning in medical bills left behind by her late father. Her younger brother's tuition was hanging by a thread, and her mother's prescriptions were overdue. Sophia was not looking for a miracle. She was just hoping to survive another month without losing the little apartment they called home. But destiny never asks permission. It arrives unannounced, often dressed in the most impossible disguises. The call had come only hours earlier. A man she had never met invited her to a quiet cafe downtown. His tone was formal, businesslike, but the urgency in his voice had unnerved her. Against her better judgment, Sophia had agreed. She needed answers. She needed help, and maybe, just maybe, this stranger knew a way out of the storm. She pushed open the cafe door. The warm glow of golden light washed over polished wood and the soft aroma of roasted coffee. In the far corner sat a man in a wheelchair. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his dark suit impeccably cut, his hair streaked with silver at the temples. His eyes, however, were sharp, measuring her in an instant. "Sophia Carter?" His voice carried authority, calm yet commanding. She nodded, unsure, and took the seat across from him. "My name is Alexander Hale," he said evenly. "I will get straight to the point. I know about your debts, your brother's tuition, and your mother's prescriptions. I can solve all of it, right now." "Oh?" Sophia blinked, confused and wary. "How do you know about my family?" "I make it my business to know things," Alexander replied without hesitation. "What I need in return is simple. Marry me." The words struck her like a thunderclap. Marry him? A disabled millionaire she had never met before? Her heart thudded against her ribs. She wanted to laugh, to get up and leave, but the intensity in his gaze froze her in place. "This is not about romance," he continued, his tone measured. "It is about appearances, legacy, and control. I need a companion in name, someone who can play the role convincingly. You need financial security. We can help each other." Sophia's throat tightened. Her instinct screamed that this was madness. She had barely enough to pay rent, yet here was a man offering her everything in exchange for her freedom. Her pride flared, but so did her desperation. Alexander leaned closer, his eyes unreadable. "Think of it as a contract, Miss Carter. Nothing more. You will not be asked for affection, only loyalty. And in return, your burdens disappear." Outside, the storm raged against the windows, lightning splitting the night sky. Inside, Sophia's mind was a battlefield of fear and temptation. Could she really tie herself to a stranger, even one in a wheelchair, even one with such power? The clock above the counter ticked louder with every second of silence. Her hands trembled as she gripped her coffee cup, the warmth grounding her. She saw her mother's weary smile in her mind, her brother's hopeful eyes, the eviction notice waiting back home. This was not a choice between love and money. It was survival. Finally, Sophia met Alexander's gaze and whispered, "I will need time." He inclined his head, a faint smile touching his lips. "Do not take too long. The offer will not stand forever." And with that, the first step into a storm of lies, secrets, and unexpected truths had been taken. Sophia left the cafe that night with the rain soaking her coat, her heart heavier than ever, not knowing that the altar ahead would reveal far more than vows. It would reveal the truth that would shatter her world and rebuild it all at once. The rain had followed Sophia all the way home, soaking through her coat and into her bones. By the time she reached the small apartment she shared with her mother and younger brother, her shoes squished with every step. The hallway light flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the peeling wallpaper. She paused at the door, took a steadying breath, and stepped inside. Her mother sat at the kitchen table, pale and weary, sorting through a pile of pill bottles. The air smelled faintly of broth and disinfectant. Across from her, Noah, barely 20 years old and wide-eyed with determination, scribbled equations into a worn notebook. He looked up when Sophia entered. "You are late again," he said softly, though not with anger. His eyes, tired but hopeful, studied her face. "Did you have another shift?" Sophia forced a smile as she shrugged out of her wet coat. "Something like that." Her mother coughed, thin shoulders trembling. "You look exhausted, darling. Sit down. Eat something." Sophia's gaze swept the table. Half a loaf of bread, a pot of soup stretched too thin, and bills stacked high beside the salt shaker. The electricity notice, the hospital invoice. The eviction warning folded neatly, almost accusingly. She sank into the chair, her hands trembling against the worn wood. Alexander's words echoed in her mind. "I can solve all of it. Right now. Marry me." It was insane. It was impossible. And yet here, in the dim light of their kitchen, surrounded by the reality of debt and illness, it almost felt like temptation itself had taken form. She pushed her soup around the bowl, appetite gone. Her mother reached for her hand, squeezing gently. "Sophia, you have been carrying too much. You work 2 jobs, you pay the bills, you hold us together. Your father would be proud, but you cannot keep doing this alone." "I can manage," Sophia whispered, though the words felt hollow. Her mother shook her head, her frail voice steady. "Managing is not living. I do not want to see you burn yourself out before you have even had a chance to dream." Noah looked up from his notebook. "I applied for more scholarships, but without tuition, I will be dropped by the end of the semester. I can take on work, Sophia. Let me help." "You need to stay in school," Sophia insisted. Sharper than intended. The silence that followed cut deeper than the storm outside. The truth pressed in on her from every corner. Their rent was 3 weeks overdue. The pharmacy had already refused her mother's medication once. The hospital bills piled like bricks on her chest. Every path she saw led only to collapse. And then there was Alexander Hale, a stranger in a wheelchair, offering salvation with the stroke of a pen. Sophia excused herself, retreating to her small bedroom at the end of the hall. The walls were thin, the paint chipped, the single window rattling in the wind. She sat on the bed, pulled out her sketchbook, and stared at the half-finished drawing of a wide-open field she had been working on weeks ago. She had once dreamed of teaching art, of opening a small studio where children could paint without fear of judgment. That dream had been buried beneath unpaid bills and endless shifts at the diner. She closed the sketchbook and pressed her forehead against it, tears threatening. Could she really trade her freedom for stability? Could she tie her name, her life, to a man she barely knew, simply because he held the keys to her family's survival? The memory of his eyes haunted her. Sharp, commanding. Yet there had been something else there, something unspoken. Why her? Why choose a struggling waitress when he could buy loyalty from anyone with money? The question gnawed at her as the night stretched on. She could hear her mother coughing through the thin walls, Noah turning pages in his notebook, the relentless reminder of everything she stood to lose. At dawn, the storm had cleared, but her mind remained heavy with clouds. Sophia rose, dressed in her faded uniform, and walked to the diner. The clatter of dishes, the hiss of frying oil, the impatient voices of customers filled the air. Her manager barked orders, her feet ached, and her tips barely covered coffee and bus fare. Every detail of her day screamed the same truth: she was trapped. When her shift ended, she stood outside the diner, the morning sun too bright, her body heavy with fatigue. She pulled Alexander's card from her pocket, the ink sharp against the worn edges. "Think of it as a contract, Miss Carter. Nothing more. You will not be asked for affection, only loyalty. And in return, your burdens disappear." Her pulse quickened. The card seemed to burn in her palm. She thought of her mother's pale hands clutching pill bottles. She thought of Noah's future slipping away. She thought of herself, drowning in a life that no longer felt like her own. Sophia exhaled, the decision clawing at her chest. The storm had not ended. It had only moved inside her. And as she tucked the card back into her pocket, one truth settled deep in her bones. Whatever choice she made, nothing in her life would ever be the same again. 2 days passed before Sophia gathered the courage to call the number on Alexander's card. Her fingers trembled as she dialed, her breath shallow, her heart thudding in her ears. The line clicked, and his voice, calm and unyielding, answered almost immediately. "I was expecting you, Miss Carter." She swallowed hard. "I want to hear the details." There was no pause, no hesitation. 7 o'clock this evening, Brooks Bistro. Do not be late. The call ended before she could ask more. By the time Sophia arrived that night, the rain had returned, drizzling over the narrow streets and glistening on the cobblestones. Brooks Bistro glowed like a jewel in the gloom, its polished brass fixtures and tall windows exuding wealth and permanence. She hesitated at the door, feeling small in her second-hand dress, before finally stepping inside. The maitre d' ushered her to a private corner where Alexander waited, perfectly composed in his chair. His presence commanded the room, though he spoke softly when she sat down. "You have considered my proposal." "Oh, I have considered," she replied cautiously, folding her hands in her lap. "But I need to understand what you want from me." Alexander studied her, his gaze sharp, yet unreadable. "What I want is clarity. This marriage will be contractual, not emotional. There will be no affection expected from you, and none required by me. You will attend events by my side, fulfill the role of wife in name only, and maintain discretion. In return, your debts will be cleared, your family's future secured. Every detail will be written, every boundary defined." Sophia's chest tightened. "And if I say no?" His lips curved faintly, but it was not a smile. "Then you return to your life as it is, the bills, the overdue rent, your mother's prescriptions, your brother's tuition, all slipping further out of reach." Her throat burned with the truth of it. "And if I say yes?" "Then you begin a new life," Alexander said simply. "A life free of fear." He slid a leather folder across the table. Sophia hesitated before opening it. Inside was a contract, printed in precise language, each clause laid out in stark black ink. Her eyes caught on the rules. Rule 1. This marriage shall remain strictly professional. Rule 2. Both parties will appear together at a minimum of 5 public events per quarter. Rule 3. Neither party shall interfere in the private affairs of the other. Rule 4. Disclosure of this arrangement to outside parties is prohibited. Rule 5. This contract shall remain in effect for the duration of 2 years, after which dissolution may be requested without penalty. Her hands shook as she traced the words. It was colder than she had imagined, stripped of any trace of humanity, just business. A transaction dressed in vows. She looked up, meeting his steady gaze. "Why me? You could have anyone. You could hire someone who understands this world." Oh, for the first time, a flicker of something unguarded passed through his expression. "Because you are desperate enough to consider it, and because you are not like them. You have no agenda, no ties to my rivals, no hunger for my wealth. That makes you useful, Miss Carter, and, perhaps, trustworthy." His words cut, but they also rang true. She had nothing. Nothing to bargain with, nothing to lose. The waiter appeared with steaming plates of food, fragrant and artfully arranged. Sophia barely touched hers. Her appetite was gone, her mind consumed by the contract resting on the table between them. Alexander leaned back, watching her with a composure that unsettled her. "You will not be alone in this. My staff will provide what you need: wardrobe, training, even a new residence. Everything required to transform you into the woman society expects to see at my side." Sophia pressed her palms together, her breath uneven. It felt like a cage disguised as freedom. But what cage was she already living in, scraping tips from strangers and watching her family suffer? Finally, she whispered, 2 years? "Yes," he confirmed. "After 2 years, you may walk away with financial independence and a clean slate. No one will question it." The contract loomed like a shadow between them. She imagined her mother's relief, Noah's future secured, the crushing weight of bills finally gone. And she imagined herself, bound to this man, bound to his world of wealth and scrutiny. Alexander's voice was steady, final. "Sign it when you are ready, but do not wait too long. Opportunity does not knock twice. That night, Sophia returned home, with the folder clutched against her chest, her dress damp from the rain, her mind spiraling with fear and longing. In the silence of her small bedroom, she spread the contract across the bed, reading the clauses again and again until the words blurred. 2 years of her life. 2 years of pretending. 2 years that could save her family. As dawn crept through the thin curtains, Sophia closed her eyes, the pen heavy in her hand. She could almost hear her father's voice, telling her to protect her mother, to protect Noah. And with a trembling breath, she set the pen to the page. The ink flowed smoothly, binding her to a stranger, binding her to a future she could not yet imagine. The contract was signed, the path was chosen, and there was no turning back. The courthouse smelled faintly of polish and old paper, its marble floors echoing with every step. 1 week after she had signed the contract, Sophia Carter stood in a borrowed dress, her hands clasped so tightly the knuckles had gone white. Across from her, Alexander Hale sat tall in his wheelchair, his expression as unreadable as ever. The ceremony was stripped to its bones, only a handful of witnesses in attendance. Alexander's lawyer, a notary, and 2 staff members who looked more like guards than family. There were no flowers, no music, no smiling relatives. Just a quiet room, and the weight of words that were supposed to mean forever. The officiant's voice droned steadily through the vows. Sophia repeated each phrase with a trembling voice, every syllable feeling like it carved deeper into her fate. Alexander spoke his part calmly, his tone smooth, almost detached. When the words husband and wife rang out, the sound felt hollow, like an echo in an empty hall. Alexander turned to her, the faintest curve of his lips appearing. "Welcome to your new life, Mrs. Hale." The words, formal and almost mocking, sent a shiver down her spine. Afterward, a black sedan whisked them away from the courthouse, the city passing in blurred streaks beyond the tinted windows. Sophia sat stiffly, staring down at her hands. The ring on her finger gleamed too brightly, a symbol not of love, but of chains. When the gates finally opened, she drew in a sharp breath. The Hale estate sprawled before her like something from another world. The mansion rose tall and cold, with towering columns and pristine stone walls that gleamed even beneath the gray sky. The long driveway curved through manicured gardens, fountains spilling water in elegant arcs. Sophia stepped out, clutching her small suitcase. The house loomed, silent and imposing, as though it had been waiting to swallow her whole. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and old money. The foyer stretched 2 stories high, marble floors gleaming beneath a massive chandelier. Portraits of stern-faced men lined the walls, their painted eyes following her every move. Alexander's voice broke the silence. "You will find everything you need here. Dinner is at 7 o'clock sharp." A housekeeper appeared, her uniform crisp, her face blank, as she took Sophia's suitcase. Without a word, she led Sophia up the grand staircase and down a long hallway until they stopped before a door. The bedroom inside was lavish, a canopy bed draped in silk, antique furnishings polished to perfection, and tall windows that overlooked the gardens. It was beautiful. It was suffocating. Sophia sat on the edge of the bed once the housekeeper left, her hands buried in the soft blanket. The room, though elegant, felt untouched, more like a museum exhibit than a place to live. She could almost hear her mother's voice urging her to be brave, her brother's laughter echoing from far away. But here, in this vast, silent mansion, she felt utterly alone. When dinner came, she descended the staircase carefully, her dress unfamiliar against her skin. The dining hall stretched endlessly, the long table gleaming with polished silverware and crystal glasses. Alexander sat at the far end, perfectly composed, his plate untouched until she arrived. "I trust you are settling in," he said, his voice calm as he cut into his steak with surgical precision. "It is different," Sophia replied carefully. "The house is so large, I feel like I might get lost." "You will adjust," Alexander said without looking up. "In time, this will feel like home." But his words carried no warmth. The silence that followed was broken only by the clinking of utensils. Sophia tried to eat, but each bite turned to dust in her mouth. The weight of the contract pressed against her chest. Every glance at the man across the table reminded her that nothing about this life was hers. After dinner, she retreated to her room, her footsteps echoing in the empty halls. She sat at the vanity, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The woman who looked back at her wore pearls and silk, but her eyes were still the same, uncertain, frightened, clinging to a dream of freedom that now seemed impossibly far away. Outside, the rain had begun again, tapping softly against the tall windows. Sophia pulled her sketchbook from her bag and opened it to the unfinished drawing of a field bathed in sunlight. She pressed the pencil to the page, trying to lose herself in the lines, but her hand shook too much to finish. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed, its deep tones reverberating through the walls. She closed the sketchbook and whispered to herself, 2 years. I just need to survive 2 years. But deep down, she knew nothing about this arrangement would ever be simple. In the silence of that mansion, she felt the weight of secrets pressing in from every corner. Secrets that would not stay hidden forever. The first week inside the Hale estate unfolded like a series of rehearsals for a role Sophia had never auditioned for. Every morning began with the quiet arrival of a stylist, followed by a tutor who drilled her in etiquette, posture, and conversation. She was shown racks of designer gowns, each one fitted precisely to her figure, each one foreign to her hands that were used to wiping tables at the diner. Sophia tried to keep her chin up, but the mansion felt more like a stage than a home. Staff moved silently through the corridors, never meeting her gaze for more than a second. At night, she lay in the vast bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had sold herself or saved her family. One morning, she found herself standing in front of a full-length mirror as the stylist adjusted the hem of a navy gown. The fabric shimmered under the light, making her look like someone she barely recognized. "This one will be perfect for the gala next week," the stylist murmured. "You must look impeccable at Mr. Hale's side." Sophia's stomach twisted. A gala. A gathering of wealthy elites who would dissect her with their eyes, waiting to see if she belonged. She remembered the contract. At least 5 public events each quarter. This would be the first. At dinner that evening, she dared to bring it up. "Alexander," she said quietly across the long table, "I do not know how to stand in front of those people. They will see right through me." He set down his glass and regarded her steadily. "They will see what I want them to see. You will be prepared. You need only follow my lead." "But what if I make a mistake?" she asked. For the briefest moment, something softened in his expression. "Then you will learn. The world respects composure more than perfection." The words, though cold, gave her a strange sort of courage. The night of the gala arrived too quickly. Sophia stepped out of the car into a sea of glittering lights and flashing cameras. The mansion hosting the event was even grander than the Hale estate, its entrance lined with marble statues and fountains that glowed under golden spotlights. She clutched Alexander's arm as he guided his wheelchair forward, the weight of countless eyes pressing down on her. Inside, chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting light across crystal glasses and gowns that shimmered like liquid silver. Waiters glided past with trays of champagne, and the hum of conversation filled the air like a low tide. Alexander moved through the crowd with effortless authority. Guests greeted him with nods of respect, their eyes flicking curiously towards Sophia. Whispers trailed behind them, a tide of speculation. She could almost hear the words, "Who is she? Where did she come from?" When they reached the center of the room, a man with graying hair approached, his smile sharp. "Alexander, good to see you out. And this must be your new wife." His gaze swept Sophia from head to toe, his tone dripping with condescension. "She is unexpected." Sophia's face burned. She opened her mouth, then closed it, panic fluttering in her chest. Alexander's voice cut through, calm and unwavering. "Sophia is exactly who she needs to be. And I would advise you to remember your manners, Charles." The man's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing, before he excused himself quickly. Relief washed over Sophia, though her hands still trembled. She leaned closer and whispered, "Thank you." Alexander did not look at her, but his reply was low enough for only her to hear. "That was your first test. You passed." Oh. As the evening continued, Sophia found herself drifting into conversations she had never imagined having about art collections, investments, and philanthropy. She smiled, nodded, and tried to remember the rules drilled into her. Her heart raced, but she held her ground. At one point, she caught sight of her reflection in the tall mirrors lining the ballroom. The woman staring back at her looked poised, confident, almost regal. Yet deep inside, she still felt like the waitress clutching a tray of coffee cups. When the orchestra began to play, couples drifted toward the dance floor. Alexander turned his chair slightly, his eyes on the swirling figures. "You should join them," he said. Sophia shook her head quickly. "I would make a fool of myself." A faint curve touched his lips. "Perhaps another time." Oh. They stayed until the final toast, Alexander speaking with practiced authority while Sophia stood at his side, her smile steady despite the exhaustion burning in her legs. When they finally returned to the Hale estate, she collapsed onto the bed, the gown pooling around her like spilled ink. Her chest rose and fell with uneven breaths. She had survived. Against every doubt, she had stood before a crowd of strangers and held her own. As she drifted into uneasy sleep, one truth settled in her mind. This life might have begun as a contract, but each day was weaving her deeper into a world where appearances ruled and secrets lurked in every shadow. And the farther she walked into it, the harder it would be to ever find her way back. The days after the gala carried a strange weight. Sophia tried to push forward, wearing the gowns, smiling at the cameras, repeating the lines she had been taught. Yet inside she felt the cracks widening. She had stepped into this life for survival, but now it seemed to demand more than she could give. One evening, she found herself wandering the quiet halls of the Hale estate. The storm outside rattled the windows, thunder rolling across the night sky. Drawn by the faint light spilling under a door, she pushed it open and discovered Alexander alone in the library. He sat near the window, the glow of the fire outlining his face. His usual mask of confidence had slipped. His shoulders sagged, his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the glass. For a long moment, he did not even notice her. "You should not be sitting in the dark," Sophia said gently. Alexander turned his head, his voice lower than she had ever heard it. "Darkness is honest. It does not pretend." She stepped closer, her heart quickening. "You carry yourself as if nothing touches you. But I see it. This house, this chair, this fight with your family, it weighs on you." His jaw tightened, but he did not deny it. Instead, he whispered, "Pity is worse than pain. That is why I never let them see." Her chest ached. "I do not pity you, Alexander. I see you." His gaze lifted to hers, and in that moment the distance between them seemed to vanish. For the first time, she saw not the millionaire who had bound her with a contract, but a man stripped of all defenses. The silence was thick with unspoken truths. Her pulse raced, her breath shallow. And though neither of them moved, something between them shifted. The boundary between duty and feeling blurred, and Sophia realized with quiet fear that her heart was no longer following the rules of the contract. The uneasy quiet that had lingered after their late-night conversation did not last long. 3 weeks later, Alexander insisted that Sophia accompany him to another gathering, this time a high-profile fundraising banquet in the heart of the city. The grand ballroom glittered with chandeliers, laughter, and polished shoes clicking across marble floors. Sophia felt every stare as they entered together, her arm resting lightly on the side of his chair. For the first hour, she held herself steady, smiling politely as introductions passed. She tried to remind herself of his words, that composure mattered more than perfection. But whispers trailed behind her wherever she went. She could feel them like needles against her skin. The evening unraveled when Eleanor Briggs, Alexander's sharp-tongued cousin, stepped into their circle of conversation. She carried a glass of champagne and a smile that was as bright as it was venomous. "Alexander," she said sweetly, "we are all still so curious about this whirlwind marriage. Imagine our surprise when a man who has kept his distance for so long suddenly presents a bride out of thin air." Several heads turned. Sophia's heart pounded. Eleanor's gaze cut toward her, assessing and cruel. "Tell me, Mrs. Hale, did you and Alexander meet under the usual circumstances? Or was it arranged?" A low murmur spread through the crowd. Sophia's throat tightened. The words of the contract screamed in her mind. No disclosure, no truth. Before she could form a reply, Alexander's voice sliced through the tension, firm and unyielding. "You have crossed a line, Eleanor." She tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Oh, I only ask because the board wonders. With your health and certain limitations, people naturally question. They whisper about motives, about appearances. The implication hung in the air, heavy and cruel. Sophia's cheeks burned with humiliation. Alexander wheeled forward, his eyes hard. If anyone wishes to question my leadership, they will do it in the boardroom, not at a charity event. Do you understand? The sharpness in his voice silenced the small crowd, but the damage was already done. Sophia felt the stares on her back, the pity, the judgment. Her hands shook as she turned away, slipping quickly out of the ballroom. In the quiet hallway outside, her breath came fast and shallow. She leaned against the wall, fighting back tears. When Alexander found her moments later, she did not look at him. "They see through everything," she whispered. "To them, I am nothing but a pawn. And you never told me the full truth." "Who am I to them, Alexander? Who am I to you?" He met her gaze in silence, and for the first time since their marriage began, his composure faltered. The silence between them was more devastating than any answer. As the car carried them back to the Hale estate that night, Sophia stared out at the passing lights, her heart heavy. The life she had agreed to was unraveling, and she realized that secrets would soon destroy what little trust they had begun to build. The Hale estate was cloaked in silence when they returned from the banquet, but Sophia's thoughts were louder than the storm clouds gathering outside. She retreated quickly to her room, her dress still glittering under the chandelier light, her heart heavy with shame and anger. The scene replayed in her mind again and again, Eleanor's mocking words, the murmurs of the crowd, the humiliation of standing beside a man whose secrets she barely understood. Hours passed before the knock came. It was steady, deliberate. When she opened the door, Alexander was waiting, his face drawn with fatigue, his eyes shadowed by something more than anger. "Sophia," he said quietly, "we cannot leave tonight unspoken. You deserve to know why I made the choices I did." "Oh," she crossed her arms, her voice sharp. "Then speak. Because right now, I feel like nothing more than a shield you put between yourself and your enemies." He wheeled himself into the room, stopping near the window where rain streaked against the glass. For a moment, he stared into the night as though weighing every word. Then, with a measured breath, he began. "The accident that confined me to this chair was no accident. My car was tampered with, and I have reason to believe Eleanor was behind it. She has long wanted control of the company, and when I survived, she turned to undermining my reputation instead. That is why I needed someone untouched by this world, someone who could stand beside me without ties to her or to the board." Sophia's heart pounded. The puzzle pieces aligned in ways that chilled her. The urgency of the marriage, the secrecy, the contract. It had never been about convenience alone. It had been about survival. Her voice trembled. "So I was never a wife to you. I was a wall." Alexander turned toward her, and for once, his composure cracked. "At first, yes. That is all you were meant to be. But you have given me more than protection. You have stood in rooms that tried to break you and did not fall. You have shown me a courage that I did not expect. You matter more than I ever intended you to." Sophia's eyes stung, her emotions torn between fury and something deeper she could not deny. "If you had told me this from the beginning, maybe I could have stood by you without feeling like a stranger in my own life." Alexander's voice softened, heavy with sincerity. "I was afraid that the truth would drive you away before you had a chance to see who I really am." The words hung between them, fragile yet powerful. Sophia looked at him, her chest rising with uneven breaths. "Then hear me now. I will not be just a name on a contract anymore. If I stay, it has to be real." "Oh?" For the first time, Alexander's guarded eyes softened, and in that still, storm-lit room, something shifted, not contract, not pretense, but the first spark of something dangerously close to love. The storm between them had broken open the walls of silence, and in the days that followed, everything seemed to move toward a final reckoning. Eleanor struck hard, calling an emergency meeting of the company's board. Rumors of a sham marriage had spread like fire, and now Alexander's position as head of the Hale Empire was under attack. Sophia walked into that boardroom by his side, her heart pounding but her chin held high. She no longer felt like the timid girl dragged into a contract. She was here by choice, ready to face the judgment of men and women who had never believed she belonged. Eleanor's voice rang sharp across the table. This marriage is nothing but a staged performance. Alexander Hale is unfit to lead, and his so-called wife is proof of his deception. Whispers rippled through the room. Sophia's pulse hammered in her ears, but when she looked at Alexander, she saw not the cold strategist from their first meeting, but the man who had revealed his scars, the man who had chosen honesty over pride. Sophia rose to her feet. Yes, this marriage began as a contract. I will not deny that. But what grew from it is real. I have seen this man fight through pain most of you cannot imagine. I have seen him lead, not with cruelty, but with vision and integrity. You call me a shield, but I stand here as his partner, not because I was paid to, but because I choose him. The room fell silent. Alexander's hand reached for hers, steady and sure. For the first time, he spoke without armor. Sophia is right. I built this empire through discipline, but I will defend it with truth, and I will defend her the same way. Oh, the vote came, and Eleanor's challenge collapsed. The board stood behind Alexander, leaving Eleanor stripped of her schemes. That night, back at the Hale estate, the air was lighter than it had been in months. In the garden, lanterns glowing softly in the evening breeze, Alexander turned to Sophia. His voice was no longer commanding, but vulnerable. I asked you once to marry me as part of a contract. Tonight, I ask you again. Stay with me, not as duty, but as my wife in truth. Tears filled her eyes. Yes, Alexander, for love, not for survival. When his lips met hers, the world seemed to fall silent. What had begun as a cold agreement ended as a vow born from choice, justice, and a love that no contract could ever bind.